being here in person. Thank you for being here online. I'm really excited to have Megan walk through this project with you. This has been a long time in the making. The beginnings of this project started when QDF was taking a look at their own anti-harassment policy. This was a board initiative. Our president at the time was Anissa Cameron, and was really embraced, and the beginnings, we'll say, of where we're at now was begun by Patrick Lloyd Brennan and Lior Maharjan, who really took the idea of expanding the idea of protection, harm reduction for our theater community and membership, and seeing where QDF intersected with that and what we could do to really uplift and collaborate better together. So it started at the board level. We were at the time looking into a person, which I'm very happy to say we have now for our internal staff. And from there, it was handed over to the staff. This is around 2020, I'll say, 2021, when myself and Andy, who was the director of operations at the time, we took it on, and it became actually a staff initiative to see what we could do. Did we want a membership agreement? Did we want a code of conduct? Was this about QDF's own ethics and values, and how does that trickle down to our community as well? So we did a lot of work internally at that point. An incredible facilitator. I want to shout out Amy McDonald, who led myself, Anna Burkholder, and Kat Preston on where this could go directionally. And we did some small testing with some members as well, looking at some policies and what felt right. And we went back to the drawing board again. What I've learned in this process is that it takes time. It takes a lot of consultation, which you'll hear about, a lot of research, and a lot of care. So what we're doing now is with a approximately 3-phase trajectory for this. It's a multi-year project, but where we're at today, we've just finished this first phase, which is the community consultation. So we brought on our project facilitator, Crystal Harrison, and project coordinator, Megan Schroeder, who you're going to hear from tonight, who really went about the consultation process and how can we best hear from our community and membership, ask what it is that they want before we make decisions for them, hear about their experiences, and start to look at our programming, our organizational structure of how can we support the change that we want to see. So we're going to walk through a little bit of that tonight. You'll have an opportunity to ask some questions. But for now, I will turn it over to Crystal and Megan.
Hello. So before we jump into Crystal's portion of the presentation, where she'll walk you through more in depth about the findings and the conclusions and recommendations of the consultation, I'll just give you a brief overview of kind of how this process went down and a few key definitions just to go over so we're all on the same page when I use some of the words or Crystal uses some of the words today. So yeah, the community consultations, we gathered 54 participants, not all of which were active members, most of which were active members of QDF, but all were active members of the Quebec theater scope. They went through approximately like our interviews and consultations with Crystal. They were all kept anonymous, so the people that knew of the participants were myself and Crystal through the selection, and then Crystal went through all of the documentation and made sure that any identifying factors were taken out of these documentations, that what you see here today is really just factual information that has been drawn out. So these are the definitions that we really want to go over today, just so that we're all on the same page about what we mean when we are saying we had folks speak of incidences of harm or incidences of conflict. I am going to read these definitions just because they are inspired not from my own words, but from Adrian B. Brown, and these come from her wonderful book called We Will Not Cancel Us and Other Dreams of Transformative Justice. So this is where we took our inspiration from. So harm, and I think the most important thing here is us distinguishing the difference between harm and conflict for the sake of this process. So harm is a direct action that impacts a person, group, or community. The injury can be emotional, physical, sexual, or financial, etc. Harm can occur in the context of conflict. Harm often results in a clear imbalance and or abuse of power. So for me, that was one of the most things, that harm can be in the context of conflict. But then conflict is not necessarily abuse or harm. So conflict is often a disagreement, difference, or an argument between two or more people that is a result of miscommunication or misunderstanding. Conflicts can be direct and named or indirect and felt. Conflicts rooted in genuine differences are rarely resolved quickly and easily, but can become transformative through mediation and with the willingness of all participants. I just love her words in that. It's like very clear as to which is which. And then the last thing that we'll just define, because we use the word reporting process quite frequently, and it was one of the largest questions we asked to the participants, which was, what kind of reporting processes are we looking for, if any? So when we spoke about reporting processes, what we meant was any process that the person identified with. So that could have been speaking to the stage manager, a director, a collaborator. It could have been something that someone reported or something someone just said in passing, but felt like they had provided information to someone in confidence. So the reporting process for us was very broad, even though we do understand that a more formal definition of reporting process is something that is meant to be quite formal and meant to be collected and stored and presented and passed on through a certain system. That's not what we were necessarily looking for with this process and gathering. I believe that's it. Yeah, we just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the participants in this, because Crystal can speak to this too, she was with them, but they gave a lot of their time, of their energy, emotional labor. So we've broken down this report into like numbers and facts, but it's really, really, really important that as we're reading it, listening to it, or here today, that we remember that there are real individuals, emotions, and really brave stories behind these numbers today. So we just want to take a moment to acknowledge that and thank the participants for their willingness. Yeah. And then I'll pass it over to Crystal. I will put my email in the chat. So anyone who is online, if you don't want to ask a question in the live stream, you can email me and I'll pass the question on either live tonight, or I'll pass it off to QDF later in an anonymous fashion as well. So that'll go into the chat.
Okay, ready? Perfect. So hi, everyone. My name is Crystal. If anybody here participated in the consultation process, you might recognize me. I also just wanted to highlight as well that I am not a member of the theater community, so that was a very intentional choice, both for protecting anonymity and I would not necessarily have like a bias. So all of the data that I'm presenting is not my opinion whatsoever. It's only strictly from the consultation. So the stories that people shared, I once again just wanted to reiterate the gratitude that I have for the whole community who participated in this. It was truly an honor to have people share their stories and trust me with the process of carrying those stories and being able to present those findings now. I think this work is really, really important, and I learned so much throughout this process, and I think you'll see me at a lot of shows moving forward because I kind of fell in love with the theater community through this process. So I just really wanted to thank everybody who did participate in this process. So next I'm going to jump into some significant data and notable quotes. So out of all the 54 participants, all except for one experienced or witnessed harm in a creative space. And one participant preferred to describe their experience as a conflict rather than harm. So I think that number is really significant, just in proving how necessary this project and this work is, as this is basically a universal experience within the community. Most instances of harm were experienced or witnessed in rehearsal spaces or during shows. 14 people had experienced harm in educational settings, and 5 during cast parties as well. So it also shows kind of the variety of spaces where this is occurring. The disciplines of participants, we had performers, directors, artistic directors, producers, teachers, designers, playwrights, technicians, stage managers, and production managers. I also learned through this process that people often wear many hats. So people would often be more than just one of these things, which was very cool and very interesting. So people had, a variety of different experiences depending on what hat they were wearing at the time that they were, when they're sharing their experiences. We also kind of wanted to signify the barriers to reporting incidents of harm. So again, this is what is guiding the future, what is currently existing. So all 54 participants did answer this question. Throughout the consultations, people had the choice or the option to skip any question, respond very briefly, respond in detail as they wish. It was very kind of participant-led. So everybody did answer this question. They all used very similar language in their responses, highlighting fear due to a lack of clarity. And the responses really came down into these categories. So the most reported barrier that people had was a fear of repercussion. And that was really, really a driving factor of people not bringing up instances when they'd experienced harm. Also a lack of trust in the process, unclear who to report to, so just not even knowing where they could go if they wanted to, had to continue working. So really just the pace, that often referred to the pace of like, okay, I just kind of have to get through this. Like we're in rehearsal, we only have a couple days, or our show is only on for a couple nights. I just got to get through this. Not wanting to take on the emotional labor of reporting, which is super fair. Power dynamics, so that also ties in a little bit of fear of repercussion, but a lot of times, as we said, people are wearing different hats. So if somebody that you could report to was somebody who was seen as having authority in the community, for example, people didn't want to tarnish their own name or be labeled as difficult to work with, or generally just being discouraged from reporting. So maybe they wanted to, but felt they actually couldn't do that even if they wanted to. So those were all the barriers that people had experienced and witnessed. This is a term that I learned throughout the consultation process, whisper network. So a whisper network has been used as a reporting mechanism in the absence of something else. So this is a quote pulled from one of the consultations, slightly adapted for anonymity, but I chose this one because it really highlighted a through current throughout all of those consultations. The term whisper network came out so often, and I had not really heard that term before. So it's really a way that the community is trying to protect itself. So what that means is people sharing stories very informally with each other about other people or instances that had happened as a means of protection. And it can be a very effective means of protection within a community, but it also doesn't necessarily lead to positive changes, for example. So that was kind of, it can be a useful tool, but how proactive is it necessarily? Came up quite often. And the other question we asked was, what would you like to see happen if somebody were to disclose a harmful incident in the context of an art service organization? So for example, if somebody were to come to QDF and say, hey, this thing happened, what would you like the next steps to be? So a lot of people thought having an active listener would be really nice. Individualized support centering the person who experienced that harm. So it's so broad, but literally just being like, whatever this person needs, which is also very fair. It's going to be different depending on every single circumstance. There's no, like, what this shows is there's not really one solution. Information on potential avenues. So again, people not knowing where they could go was a big barrier. So just having somebody be like, hey, these are all the things you can do. You can make an informed choice now about how you want to move forward, or if you even want to move forward. That's also an option of not doing anything. You might just want somebody to talk to. Mediation, mental health support, preventative aspects or educational resources. Somebody to follow through up or after was also a big one, of people being like, hey, this thing happened and nobody ever checked in on me. A lot of people mentioned not wanting a form of policing. reporting system to either the company, the union, the community, some type of helpline, just time to process, which seems like time is often not of the essence in theater in productions. And 7 people wanted access to an ombudsperson. So again, I want to just reiterate, like every single one of these numbers is a person, their experiences, and some people would say several options as well. Again, a couple quotes here, whatever the response, it needs to be fast, needs to be done at the same pace as production moves, so really needs to be quick, and needs to be accessible. If there's too many steps, that will actually deter people from accessing it in the first place. And that whoever is doing this responding needs to understand the dynamics of the theater community. That was also very important. So next we'll move on to conclusion and recommendations. Again, these are not my personal recommendations. These are recommendations pulled from, well, they are my personal recommendations, but pulled from the data of the consultations based on the insights gathered. So fundamentally, what people were asking for is a cultural shift within the theater community. A critical aspect of this shift is the urgent need to alleviate that fear of repercussions. That was really a big driver of people not wanting to bring up incidents of harm. So that would be kind of really the undertone of that cultural shift that we're looking for. There's also a desire to foster a more inclusive and transparent environment, encouraging leaders in the community to take on this initiative and set out discussions at the outset of productions. So that should prioritize transparency, covering a wide range of aspects, including reporting pathways, payment structures, expectations, values, boundaries, and communication methods. So really there was just a desire to have these conversations at the outset of every production so that people know what their options are. Also, maintaining regular check-ins throughout the production process can ensure that concerns are addressed promptly and directly. So having these conversations at the beginning and then continuously providing opportunity for people to come forward by creating continual check-ins. It's also recommended that companies set up multiple reporting pathways so that members of the production have both anonymous and direct access to reporting. So this could be where Quebec Drama QDF could be most effective in this way of being one of the options that people could use. Again, there was really that emphasis on wanting options and knowing what all those options are from the get-go. In terms of QDF's role, many people also wanted a focus on preventative aspects rather than having QDF step in as some kind of policing body. So QDF could think about incentivizing, encouraging, and promoting its members to center better working conditions by communicating clear expectations and standards for their members, providing relevant training, and creating opportunities for open dialogue amongst the community. So what that could actually mean would be facilitating postmortems for companies and keeping a report on record. So postmortems are something that people didn't encounter that often, but really appreciated when they were there. So that could be a new standard kind of implemented, and QDF could kind of guide how to do this, could lead them, offer mediations if needed if something had occurred. Having member profiles display if they've taken an EDI workshop with QDF or some kind of incentive to take relevant training with QDF. So there was a lot of that mention of how do we get people to actually do this, right? The community says they want it, and then do they actually show up? Do they actually follow through? So this kind of incentivization of saying, hey, everybody, we're putting together a cast, we will prioritize people, for example, who have this kind of display that they've taken these type of workshops, they've done this work. Also help the industry set better working condition standards by setting clear expectations for members regarding wages, working hours, and supporting programs that could subsidize mental health care, childcare, and conflict resolutions funds for companies. So there was also mention of kind of helping access resources, funds, things like that for things that aren't often considered in productions, like childcare. These were some of the major kind of trainings and workshops that people requested that they would like QDF to offer. So intimacy direction was huge. So many people wanted that, and way more often. So that was really, really number one. Mental health first aid was also very recommended. Decolonizing theater practice, defining and addressing harm. So conflict resolution, nonviolent communication, bystander intervention, consent and boundaries. So again, giving people the tools to intervene in the moment was really, really requested. and also contract negotiation. So a little bit more of the logistical aspect, but that could include financial literacy, for example, understanding the working conditions, the hours, things like that, and just really giving people the tools to figure out what they're signing onto. Also really important to note that workshops and educational opportunities should also cater to technicians and designers. So this was a really big one that I consulted a whole bunch of different people in different roles. And, when we talk about, for example, a room agreement or having those conversations at the very beginning of a rehearsal, a lot of designers or technicians might not be there and part of that process. Or if there's, content in the production that could be harmful that is discussed in advance, but they're not brought into those conversations. So that was really interesting to me that they really wanted to be included in that process. There's a large demand for them to be included in the conversations and education. Often they're not prepared with the information they need to succeed or come in late to the process and not given pertinent information to protect their mental wellness and safety during a production. So I thought that was really important to highlight as well. Furthermore, it's recognized that a substantial amount of initial harm is inflicted or the seeds of harm are sown during students' time in educational settings. So we did talk to a lot of either current or past students. And one thing that really stuck out to me is in a lot of these educational settings is I heard very frequently that like, oh, well, this is how it's always been. Like I went through it, you have to go through it too. So again, that's what we mean when we say this major cultural shift has to happen. That's not a reason to keep doing this, to keep perpetuating, negative standards, things like that. So it was recommended and greatly appreciated if QDF could create stronger relationships with students during their time at institutions, helping educate them about standard practices and QDF's values, creating training opportunities and community programs to empower them during their studies and as soon as they graduate. With regard to creating more opportunities for community dialogue, QDF could focus on bringing in trained facilitators or look at various decolonized approaches for community-led discussions. So creating more dialogue amongst community helps create unity, critical thinking, humanizes barrier pockets of the community are facing, and generates self-accountability and develops transparent communication, which would be key values in conflict resolution and harm reduction. So kind of acknowledging what's actually happening in the community, bringing people together to talk about it. There was a lot of suggestions about how this could actually play out. So it'll be interesting to see what comes next in that regard. And we did ask questions on how the community thought QDF and, the theater community in general could improve anti-ableist, anti-colonial, and anti-racist practices within the organization and within the community. So it was really suggested that QDF be more transparent about the work that they're already doing and kind of become a mirror for the community. Lots of great suggestions on how QDF can continue and advocate to create more specific spaces for BIPOC artists, and recommended that QDF speaks with various consultants who specialize in decolonizing and implementing anti-racist practices into theatrical spaces and arts organizations. So there's a lot of really great concrete suggestions in this section of the consultation, which I was able to pull out and include in the full formal report that was presented to QDF. And a really frequent call to action was for QDF to support anti-ableist advocacy and practices. We all know Montreal is not a very accessible city in so many ways, especially in a lot of our community spaces and performing spaces. So this would include venue accessibility, but also advocacy for relaxed performances and mask mandate shows, and securing accessible spaces for independent productions. Internally, we're aware that QDF has already initiated the process of creating documents regarding venue accessibility and advocating for mask-mandated shows. Therefore, moving forward, it's recommended to begin educating organizations and members about relaxed performances, accessible performances, develop strategies, surveys that demonstrate that there is a need for this, because that's often kind of the counter argument of like, oh, it's a minority of the population who actually wants this or needs this. But if we have the data to prove, like, actually, no, this is how there is a desire for this within the community, and that's true community is offering shows like this. When asking how everyone felt and thought about QDF, 3 words that came up most frequently were representation, community, and care. So these fundamental principles should guide the path forward as the Quebec Drama Federation and the theater community continue to work hand in hand to create a more inclusive, supportive, and equitable environment for all its members. So next, I'll hand it back over to Holly, who can speak a little bit about what's next. Just grab that.
Thank you. Thank you, Crystal. So something that we've really taken on as some first next steps is that we pulled from this report is what is the professional development that we can provide towards prevention. So we do have an intimacy direction workshop coming up, postponing from March, but into the late spring and early summer. And this is a collaboration we would like to keep up, not just once in a blue moon, something that can be a training that's offered to our community more frequently as requested. And another upcoming workshop that we have in 2025-2026 is something we're calling Collaborating with Care. So this is a workshop from the casting process all the way through post-production about the ways that you can be integrating care and consideration into your production. And this is something we're hopefully going to be collaborating with the folks at Imago, Krista Jackson, and Danny Lorrain. So those are some workshops that we have already slated for the next year or so. I'll say that our workshops are a little bit more specific in terms of how we have to function and the kind of content that we can put out there. But what's great about something like Serving Up Knowledge, which is what you're at right now, is that we get to be a little bit more flexible. And we look at this as kind of a more informal learning opportunity. All that to say is that it will remain at low cost, as our workshops generally are as well. But that's the kind of places that we can really start to put some of these more anti-oppression, decolonizing theater kind of knowledge sharing opportunities into our programming. So we have a couple that we are planning right now. I don't want to say it because I don't have them fully solidified, but I'm really excited about some of the folks I think we're going to be collaborating with in the next 6 months on some of these. This is something in the past, and a good example is we did a small group of anti-harassment, like starting your policy. So this was towards our independent companies and our community theater companies who did not have these kinds of safeguards in their repertoire so far. I think that's a really important thing to note at QDF is that our membership is so diverse in terms of how they practice theater and what they have available to them. Our packed professional companies have to function in a certain way, but being able to provide a workshop that walks folks through the Canadian Theatre Agreement and what their rights are as a collaborator is something we're really interested in doing, that this isn't stuff that is just buried inside of a document. We want to make things like the CTA more accessible so people better understand what's available to them. And then again, like looking at our indie and community organizations and what's the kind of policy that we can help them create. So somewhere that we can put even just accessible documents is the Quebec Drama Database. So that's live now. That's where Crystal mentioned our venues list that has the accessibility to as many venues and rehearsal spaces as we could find. If you know of a venue or rehearsal space that isn't on there, please tell us. It's a living document. But something like the mental health resources, that's really where we're going to start putting our focus for that particular resource database is in these documents or these toolkits where people can start to get some information on how they can be better supported as artists. I wanted to say that this project, the Membership Empowerment Project, is in the strategic plan of QDF. So we are very committed to continuing this project on. As I mentioned, this is phase 1, but we have plans for phase 2. Thank you to the Canada Council for supporting this first phase. We had to delay phase 2 ever so slightly because we did not get our funding, but we are going to be writing more grants for this particular second phase. And come hell or high water, we will be doing the next phase, whether we have that kind of project support or not. Just to give you a little bit of idea of what that phase 2 looks like, we are going to have, this is included in the next steps, we're going to be spearheading something called industry research. So this is looking at what other organizations in the country, even internationally? What do they have in terms of support, reporting systems, anything that would be great for, yes, the arts sector, but we're looking at diverse sectors as well to see where we can pull some structure from. Something we're very passionate about is not just looking at formal organizations, but grassroots community-led organizations as well, because we are not a union or an association. We don't have to function perhaps with the same rigidity. And we're looking for ways that we can blend these two worlds and create something that's malleable at QDF, because we really think of ourselves as a community organization. So that's the industry research. And then with that, hopefully that coordinator will be able to make a recommendation of what would fit well at QDF, and that's something we would obviously present to the membership in the community and potentially a steering committee as well. And the second part of that would then to do an internal audit. So that's looking at QDF's organizational structure and what can we actually house. When we started this project, I thought we were going to be building a full reporting system. And what I've really learned from these consultations is that I don't know that that's necessarily what people are asking for. Yes, there's opportunities for QDF providing mediation or even an anonymous opportunity for folks to be able to report. But from what I understand, having something that is a full new branch of QDF around reporting isn't necessarily what the community is asking for. So then what is it that we can do that can be programs, services that can continue to support and elevate and cultivate a better atmosphere at large without us necessarily policing, as it was said, what's happening in the community. So I'm really excited about even just some ideas I already have. I want to just like spurt off all my dreams, but I won't do that. You can talk to me afterwards about that. But I really feel like with phase 2, we'll be able to see how the roots can grow into the structure of QDF as an organization and see some of this come to pass. So one thing I also wanted to just mention is that this is what we call, what you have your hands on is called the external report. As Crystal mentioned, there are a few things that were left out of this particular report because for a multitude of reasons. But I believe in the appendix of the report has all of the full consultation, like the heading of the full consultation. So check out the appendix of the report. If there's anything that you would like more information on that wasn't included on this report or have questions about, please write to us. It is not a secret document. It's very much available for transparency, but we really wanted to get the information out there so that folks can start to have their experiences potentially reflected back at them, or at the very least, start to consider the ways in which your personal practice can start to shift around this kind of change. So if you're interested in what else is in the internal report, we are very happy to share it with you. I think that's all I wanted to say. I think we're ready to take any questions if they're out there. So this is an opportunity for our folks online. If you want to either write questions in the chat, Megan's got her eye on it, or send an email over to MEP coordinator at quebecdrama.org.
MEP info?
MEP info at quebecdrama.org? Okay, great. Thank you. But we also welcome questions from the room, from the small but mighty group that we have here. But I'll give maybe like a breath for folks to kind of mentally download what just happened.
Also, if there's no questions, I can also just speak to how important this report is, even if you already have a system. Like, look at it.
Yeah, I love that. In the interim, Megan's going to talk a bit. Please keep sending.
Why not? No, I just wanted to speak to the importance of this document and looking at this document or listening to, we also have a live recording as well that you can listen to as like a little podcast while you're walking, or listen back to this presentation. I think from the Whisper Network, a lot of people might say that they already have systems in place, which do exist and are so great. If you're in school, you might have a system that's already in place for legal purposes as well. Same with PACT. But what we gathered from these consultations and the people that participated in these consultations are part of all these networks. So I think I just wanted to highlight what Crystal was saying about the need for a cultural shift. Yes, there are systems in place, and these are recommendations on those systems and how these systems can be bettered. Some of the recommendations in there are as simple as like, when you have your first day of rehearsal, this is what people would like to see from the leaders in the room, from the director in the room, how we can set up your culture. What does your rehearsal room look like? How is your rehearsal room set up? How are these things being considered so that we can better reduce harm and conflict? Or what are the things within your community that you can set up to prevent conflict when it happens? Or if conflict happens in your space, everyone already knows how to deal with it or what the external ways of reporting are. A lot of things that came up, I know my personal experience as well when I first became a member of Equity was that I kind of became a member of Equity while I was doing a show. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I have no idea what that means. I had no idea that there was a person to report to or who that person was or what my relationship to them was. So even something as simple as like on the first day of rehearsal, you walk everyone through what that process is. So I think I just wanted to draw attention to like how practical this document is if you take like a moment with it, and that it is for everyone. And I think especially those of us who hold leadership positions in the community, I just think that there's like a responsibility to listen to what people have come forward and said and asked for. I don't know if there's questions. I just wanted to.
Any questions online in the chat?
There's thanks and gratitude, but no questions.
Oh, we'll take it. We're good in the room for any questions? Yeah.
Hi. So I was wondering what structures are already in place, and you mentioned we have become a member of Equity, and the one that they are using, like not in my space, and that structures, was that looked at as sort of like a template, or is that something that people use as a starting point, or are there comparisons going on?
Yeah.
Does that help, I guess?
Yeah, so I'm just going to repeat for folks listening online. So we had a question, and feel free to correct me if I've missed anything that you said, but there was a question around documents like not in my space that already exist. And your question was, are these templates? Sorry, can you repeat? Because I was also in the moment of transitioning.
Yeah, like when you say, well, like somebody would say, well, we already have this one, why do we need it?
Thank you. So yes.
Bring this in and say, well, we'll just use it, cut and paste.
Exactly. So the question, I'm so glad you brought that up. So the question was, these documents already exist. Do we need to create our own? Can we not just like acknowledge that these things exist, direct people to that? And is that enough? Did I paraphrase? Yeah. So that's kind of exactly what I was saying and why I want to encourage folks to read over these recommendations, because these documents are great. These documents have had a lot of care and effort put into them, and they're a really great starting point for a universal language. But what happens is every single rehearsal room, every single theatrical space is its own culture. It's its own culture of people. In the same way that QDF was like, we need to ask people how they want to be advocated for, you need to do that in your space. So a safe space, which I don't tend to use that word, I tend to use the word brave space, which I think other folks sometimes do. We can't name what a brave space is for any individual. We can't name what a safe space is for any individual. So the only way to do that is to ask the people in the room, what is the culture of this room and what do we need to make sure that we have a brave space or I'll use the word positive just for a lack of a better word right now, but a positive space for our rehearsal and creation process. So I think using a document like Not in My Space as the baseline is so great. And you can bring that into a space and be like, this is our baseline. These are the words that we know exist. What's missing for us here today? What else do we need?
Do you mind if I add to that?
Please, yeah.
I think also what's important to recognize is kind of what you're saying, Megan, but the producing company's ethos, personal values, like I really want to implore companies to really sit down and think about that as collaborators, that can be continued to be brought in, because I think what we see with some of these policies is this is a great day one policy to name. And then how is that sewn into your practice? How is that sewn into your organization? And have it be something that is a little bit more organic, that we're seeing upheld throughout the process. And I also just want to acknowledge Not in Our Space, again, incredible document and a great starting place. What I will say is that not everybody practices theater in this more formalized way. So again, with the QDF membership, we have folks who just, how their rehearsals are run are a little bit different, how they collaborate together is different. And so having something that is used as a baseline, but then again, how does this reflect the actual creative process that you engage in on top of your own values and ethos as an organization or a company or a collective, right? Does that help clarify a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of agree with all of that. So
cool.
There should be adaptable to customizable.
Yeah.
Each space and each company that needs it. So.
Exactly. And I think that, again, speaks to the ways that QDF can help provide these kinds of template policies or room agreements, starters, and then allowing folks the adaptability to make it their own that really reflect the kind of values they hold as collaborators. Cool. Please hit me.
Does QDF, or the structure that is being built here, feel that it's open to something at the board level, for instance? Many companies are nonprofit, many companies have a board of directors. Is this upward scalable to either applicable or usable in a structure of board?
Great question. I'll just repeat it quickly. Is there a possibility for these kinds of programs and services to be able to be used towards board at a board level as well? Because as nonprofits, we function with a board of directors. Something about board education is I sit on 3 different boards, and I've been working for a nonprofit for 6 years. And board education is something that is constantly in conversation. So I absolutely think that even just how a theatrical process happens is something that is missing at a board level. And so board education, I would be very interested in seeing what QDF could provide in terms of board education and again, sewing into those voices into what's happening at a staff level, and then as well as collaborators. So where our focus is right now is the producing company and those they collaborate with. But I think there's absolutely room for board education around harm reduction and just even the realities of what happens in creative spaces and how at a board level they can support an organization in continuing to deepen their work into collaborating with care, I suppose. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we see in a lot of nonprofit boards also just folks who are not artists, right? Which is great. We need you, please. But giving opportunity for folks to understand a little bit better the theatrical process and then the realities that are lived within that. Conflict will happen. We're not trying to get rid of conflict. That's ridiculous. But I think it's important also for board to be invested in what's happening with their organization and how they're being perceived also.
And conflict's a lot less scary if you have a plan.
Yeah, conflict's a lot less scary if you have a plan. If you know how to deal, for sure.
I have a question online.
Great. Yeah, please.
So for the folks in the room, we had a question online asking, in the portion about is the portion about ableism really what participants said? Because disabled theater professionals deal with a lot more than just inaccessibility. So I just wanted to take a minute and kind of explain what was chosen for this presentation and how. So everything included is directly taken from the data that was transcribed from the consultations. But even this has gone through my lens a little bit in terms of what can we pull out that's actionable, what can we pull out that was said most often as well. So again, kind of just reiterate, there was more brought up. This is very much a condensed version of what was said and kind of the top recommendations, I would say, that were most requested, most actionable for QDF to work on. And again, kind of tuning into what is currently also being done by QDF, but there was a lot more said. So to the person in the comments, absolutely there's more said, and the extent of the answers are in the full report as well. So I did kind of just, for the sake of brevity and digestibility of the report, which is quite long. I don't remember how many pages it is, but it's significant. So there is all the data on there if you would like to see more extensively how people responded to each of these questions. So I did just kind of have to scale it down to the most requested, the top answers, basically, in terms of what led to those recommendations. So I hope that responds to your question.
I'll answer that.
Yeah, perfect.
Do you want to see them?
No, I got it. I think what is also really important to take from that particular comment question is because we are asking for ways that a recommendation that can be made to QDF, and I'll take that as professional development in this case, is doing some kind of serving up knowledge, let's say, around disability justice in a creative space. That is absolutely something that is of interest. Again, that's not something you can cover in an hour or two, but I think starting with some kind of opportunity for a knowledge sharing session that touches on exactly the diversity of the disabled artist community and the different points of intersection and uniqueness there. Because as Crystal said, this is just what's being pulled from the report, but we know that it goes a lot deeper than that. And having folks even just have a baseline understanding of what disability justice looks like and some of the values and ways that we are excluding folks in our community would be a really good place, I think, for us to start. Cool. Anything else? Yeah.
I have a question about specifically with independent members, independent companies that are members of the organization. How much, if it came up in the consultations, knowledge, like how often there was knowledge or an understanding of the expectations by law that are established in Quebec as to employers' responsibilities with their policies, especially around prevention of harassment and stuff like that. Did that come up from people either talking about their experiences working with employers, independent employers, or from the other perspective from employers themselves who have had to face kind of like, you know, those expectations and the challenges in putting this stuff in place?
That's great. I'm going to just distill what you said really quickly. So the question is specifically about those who were interviewed that come from the independent theater community and their or have worked on independent production. So let's say those who are not functioning under equity, whether or not the folks during the consultations understood what their expectations and responsibilities are in terms of protection as employers, and whether that's folks spoke to their experience in an independent production, or if these are people who are independent producers, if they understood what was expected of them, really by the CNS ESST, right? But I'll let Crystal answer that.
Yeah. Especially in terms of, as you mentioned, like the legal aspect and requirement, it did not come up very often of people having that. And if I am recalling, like thinking back to many of the conversations that were had, like often a type of harassment policy, for example, would be brought up, would be signed in advance, things like that. But in practice versus being signed at the beginning, often that's where there was that break happening truly of being like, hey, we've signed these, but do I actually are we putting these in practice is something that came up quite often. And again, that need for, as we mentioned, like the standards of work ethic, that type of training was also very needed in terms of knowing that people can advocate for that was a big one as well, especially emerging artists was a big one too, of knowing what your rights actually are as emerging artists, especially in those independent companies, was a big need and an ask because it was not being done very often. If I recall, like my brief recollection from these consultations is it was not frequently discussed or known or artists were not often informed of those rights. So definitely a gap that is occurring.
I'll just say something really quickly. I'll say too, again, for QDF, that's a great opportunity for us to have a resource on our resource database of what constitutes an employer. Something that's in the internal report is the breakdown of participants and their payment and contracts. So I know that Crystal spoke to a certain number of folks who had done contracts either through profit share or honorarium. And so I think just some education on where those fall and again, then what the expectation is and how folks are protected under something like the CNSST is a really just baseline place to start as well. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, totally. And I find it really interesting what Crystal said about that point of having a policy in place, but then actually having an actionable policy and having the training to follow through with it.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing to have a document, it's another thing to be able to work it.
Absolutely. They just pointed out, Crystal made an interesting point about having a policy, but then an actionable policy and how actually to follow through with it. That's something I'd actually say that was a little bit of a downfall of QDF's serving up knowledge on anti-harassment policies is that we did like a starter pack and then let folks go from there. Just in terms of our own capacity, being able to follow through with that. But that is definitely something that, depending on how QDF moves forward with this project and what we're able to house, something that is a little bit more intimate, honestly, in terms of that kind of follow through. Again, not to be policing anyone, but just not to be too much hand holding, but I think accountability from an art service organization could have a real impact in seeing folks have the motivation and the tools and support that they need to actually embed that into practice. Anything else? Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much, everyone. If you have any further questions about what you have heard today or what you've read or listened to from the report, you're welcome to reach out to me, programming@quebecdrama.org. That's on our website as well. I think Megan will be checking her email for the next few weeks as well. So mepinfo@quebecdrama.org. This is all available on our website as well. I am really passionate about this project. Our whole team, staff, board included are. So please, if you have anything that you want to share, whether it's uplifting some more ideas around professional development or ideas around what we can be doing, or anything that really stuck out to you in this report, I'm so happy to talk more about it. Also, if I'm not the person, Megan, or we can connect you with someone within the organization to chat. Thank you again, and stay tuned on phase 2, I guess. Fingers crossed. Thank you.